The child's breathing was shallow, too shallow. A mother sat on the dirt floor of a barbed wire camp, holding her daughter close. The girl's body was frail, weak, nothing but skin and bones. She hadn't eaten in days. Around them, hundreds of women and children lay dying. No food, no medicine, just suffering. The mother whispered, "Please, just one more day." But there was no food left, no help coming. This wasn't Nazi Germany. This was British South Africa. And it wasn't just one camp, it was dozens. A war Britain thought would be quick had turned into a nightmare. And when the Boers refused to surrender, the British turned to a new strategy. They wouldn't just fight the soldiers, they would destroy their families. It all started with gold. By the late 1800s, the British Empire was unstoppable, the largest, most powerful force on earth. But in South Africa, they faced a problem. The Boers, descendants of Dutch settlers, controlled land rich with gold and diamonds, and Britain wanted it. For years, tensions simmered between the Boers and the British, but everything changed when gold was discovered in the Boer territories. British miners and businessmen flooded the region, hoping to claim their share. The Boers resisted. They passed laws to keep British influence out, refusing to give power to these foreign prospectors. The British saw this as an insult, an act of defiance. So in 1899, war broke out. At first, Britain was confident. They had the largest army, the best weapons. This would be an easy victory, but the Boers had something else. Guerrilla tactics. They didn't fight in open battlefields. Instead, they struck fast, disappeared into the hills, and attacked again. They knew the land, used hit-and-run warfare, and ambushed British supply lines. For the British, this war wasn't just difficult, it was humiliating. Their massive industrialized army was being defeated by farmers on horseback. So they made a decision that would change history. If they couldn't win on the battlefield, they would starve the enemy into submission. Civilians became the target. The British burned entire villages, destroyed farms, and poisoned water supplies. But even that wasn't enough. So they turned to something even darker, a new strategy, one the world would never forget. The British called it scorched earth. They burned Boer farms, destroyed crops, and killed livestock. But that wasn't enough. They rounded up Boer women and children, forced them onto trains, and sent them to concentration camps. There were dozens of these camps, massive enclosures surrounded by barbed wire, armed guards, and endless suffering. Inside, the conditions were nightmarish. Tents were overcrowded, thousands of people crammed together with no clean water, no proper sanitation. Disease spread like wildfire: typhoid, dysentery, measles. The British promised rations, but they were barely enough to survive. Children wasted away, their ribs pushing against their skin, their bellies bloated from hunger. Mothers watched their children die, powerless to save them. Some women, driven by desperation, ate grass, insects, or even leather scraps just to stay alive. Those who dared to protest or resist, they were beaten, starved, or left to die. The numbers were horrifying. Over 26,000 Boer women and children perished, and the British knew what was happening. Reports from inside the camps made it clear. This wasn't war. This was systematic suffering. But when people back in Britain demanded answers, the British government justified it. They called the camps refugee camps, a necessity of war. But the truth? This wasn't strategy. This was a slow, deliberate death sentence. And for the Boers, the war was no longer about land. It was about survival. The war was over, but the damage had been done. By 1902, the Boers were defeated. They had no farms left, no supplies, no way to fight. The British had won. But at what cost? Word of the concentration camps began to spread. Reports of mass starvation, disease, and death reached Britain. The British public was shocked. This wasn't war. This was a crime. Even within Britain's own government, debate erupted. Some defended the camps as a military necessity. Others called it a stain on Britain's honor. The truth was out, but justice never came. No British officials were ever punished for what had happened. The government tried to move on. But for those who had lived through it, the pain never faded. And Britain's reputation, forever stained. The Boer War ended, but the scars never healed. The concentration camps left deep resentment in South Africa. The Boers never forgot what had been done to their families. And worse, the policies Britain used in the Boer War, scorched earth, concentration camps, total war, didn't die with the war. They were used again. Decades later in World War I and World War II, concentration camps became a tool of war and genocide. And in South Africa, the war helped lay the foundation for racial segregation, oppression, and the system that would become apartheid. A war fought over gold and power had shaped a nation's future in the worst possible way. The Boer War wasn't just about land. It was about brutality, suffering, and the cost of empire. It was a war that Britain won, but at a terrible cost. 26,000 women and children dead. A strategy so ruthless it would be repeated in future wars. Some call it military strategy. Others call it a war crime. What do you think? Let us know in the comments. And if you want more dark, untold stories from history, subscribe and hit the like button, because the past is filled with shadows, and we're just getting started.